I will go ahead and call the December 16th, 2020 meeting of the Thurston County Planning Commission to order. Begin with introductions of commissioners. Scott Nelson, District 3. Don.
Don DeHaan, District 1.
Donna. Donna.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can now.
Oh, super. Okay, thanks. Yeah, good.
You want to introduce yourself?
Donna Nickerson, District 3.
Jim.
Jim Simmons, District 3.
Ed.
Ed Fleischer, District 2.
Doug.
Carmen, District 2.
Eric.
Eric Casino, District 2.
Tile.
Tiles the Husky at large.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from December 2nd, 2020 and accept the audio as the official record.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, a question on page 2, which, let's see, under paragraph, I guess it's still paragraph 1. The last sentence, it says Appendix E on those topics which deal with critical areas and shorelines. I thought my interpretation of what Andrew said was just critical areas. By adding and shorelines there could include everything. So either one, I mean, I don't know which is, maybe it's correct, but and maybe the discussion needs to be outside of the minutes. But I don't remember the and shorelines.
And Andrew DeFobis, Associate Planner, if I can jump in. I was actually out last week and I haven't seen the minutes, but you're correct. Appendix E to the Shoreline Master Program update would be, critical area regulations that are being incorporated into the document. It's a reference appendix. So I think if you wanted to lose the shorelines, you potentially could if you wanted to do that.
Okay, and I would suggest we drop the words and shorelines.
If that's the motion, I'll second it.
Yes, I guess it is.
Okay, any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of removing and shorelines from the paragraph that ends on page 2, line 5, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, any other changes? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes of December 2nd as amended and accepting the audio as the official record, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Let's go on to our public communications. Going to start with Mark.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, thank you everybody for all your hard work on this. Let me get my phone out of the way so you don't get feedback. Sorry. Just a quick comment to add to my previous ones that you all know so well. In looking at fact sheet number 2 on the current SMP website, it says that regulations have been simplified, and it says also for greater flexibility, and that's it. So the more I dig into natural, the more complicated it gets. If you look at the current SMP under natural, it says, quote, single family residences are permitted, unquote. If you look at the new SMP, it says you need a conditional use permit for single family residences. The problem then is if you go to the details elsewhere, which it doesn't really tell you to do, you'll find out that no, you can't do a single family residence within the 200 feet if you can do it outside of the 200 feet. So it's not only limiting, it's even more limiting. And then if you go to the WAC says, quote, single family residential development may be allowed as a CUP if the project, can handle ecological functions. So none of that stuff's consistent. So what I'm seeing at issue here is not only do you need to know what the difference is between the WACs and the proposed code, you also need to know how the new proposed code varies from the old code, because we've just now seen a major difference there. And you need this not just for your own purposes, but you're going to need it for the public, because if the public is thrown these documents, the current SMP is 426 pages. The new SMP is 185. I think it's because of some of those regional edition add-ons on the old one. But the point is, if the public gets a flyer that says we've simplified it and it's more flexible and that's all they get, they're going to have to wade through 185 pages trying to figure out the kind of stuff I just ran by you. And without that for you now and the public later, before your hearing, it's going to be left to community groups and the media to frame this discussion before your hearing. And I don't think that's good for anybody. So that's it. I appreciate to staff and to you and the commission all of your hard work and your patience, and wish you all the best through the next few weeks, holidays. Thanks very much.
Patrick Townsend.
Thank you, Scott. Patrick Townsend in Boston Harbor, shoreline property owner. First off, I'd like to comment about section 900-400-115D. This is about critical saltwater habitats. When you look at the definition there, a lot of things make sense. Kelp beds, eelgrass, mud flats, spawning areas, and things like that. Things that we would associate with natural areas. Then you get to commercial shellfish operations. Just, because we've been talking about this, commercial shellfish operation involves thousands of pieces of plastic, tons of plastic, constant netting over the tidelands, and then harvesting that involves flushing the tidelands into Puget Sound. So it would make a normal person's head explode to include commercial shellfish operations, these industrial operations, under critical saltwater habitat. So I think that needs a review. I know it's mentioned in the WAC. I cannot find any reference in the RCWs related to this. And it just does not make any sense at all. We all know that a tree farm is not an old growth forest, and these operations are not critical saltwater habitat. So we'd really like some review of that and explanation of where in the RCW this is required. The second topic I'd like to just bring up again is that the stakeholder group, which was started and been abruptly canceled without an explanation at the time, had broad representation from the community. Aquaculture interests, shoreline property owners, both on Puget Sound and on the lakes, building industry, quite a broad spectrum, including environmental groups. But that process was terminated without any explanation. So as we stand here today, we have not had a proper input from the community at large. And I think that the current SMP, the proposed SMP, reflects that. It's confusing. It's heavily weighted against environmental controls. The SMP is a vision statement more than anything. What vision are we proposing for Thurston County? We're looking at really prioritizing industrial operations in our Puget Sound area here in Thurston County. It's probably one of the worst uses I could imagine for a precious asset. So I think just really that needs a revisit. There's no way to spin this. We've not had proper community input. And it's really kind of shameful, in fact, that that was terminated. The Department of Ecology provides clear guidelines on what stakeholder community input should look like. We have not done that, and I think the current SMP is reflective of that. So anyway, that's the end of my comments. Wish you all happy holidays and look forward to seeing you in the new year. Thank you.
John Woodford.
Commissioners, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to reflect on some of the comments that were made at the end of the last commission meeting on December 2nd. To me, it was very clear that staff is not prepared to deal with the redesignation of 2,700 parcels. And I'm astounded that Ms. Davis said that owners would have to provide pretty solid reason not to be redesignated. It seems to me that it's up to the staff to provide the strong reason for this redesignation. These are parcels that have been residential since the 1990 SMP and further supported by the CAO. So why are they suddenly changing? I want to move on a moment to where you are in this state of Chapter 19-400. I submitted letters on the 16th of November and the 30th of November, which for the coalition. And those two letters deal with a number of the things that staff and planning commission are going through right now. For example, on Chapter 19-400, 120B4, about the additional 15-foot setback from the buffer, which was kind of closing the meeting. I just want to point out that the Thurston County SMP definitions for buffer and setback have little to do with what ecology has put forward. Ecology has totally different definitions for setback and buffer. And I think staff needs to take a good hard look at that and represent this whole notion. The assumption is that all waterfront, the assumption in the Thurston County SMP is that all waterfront properties are defined as buffers. This just isn't the case. A buffer, by definition in the Thurston County document, is a non-clearing area. And it also goes on to say that the optimal condition is composed of intact native vegetation. That's not what you see when you go around any lake. So what are those areas? There's no definition. The definition for buffer is going back from the definition of setback is going back from the buffer. They can coexist. And I think this is a critical question. There are other things I could go into, but for now, I'll close with that. Thank you.
Barry Halverson.
Thanks, Scott. I'll get right to it. My name is Barry Halverson, Lake Lawrence. On 1 September, I sent Andrew an email reference Appendix A Environmental Designations Report. On the 2nd of October, I got a response from Andrew. The highlighted portions on that said, it seems reach LLA 5 to LLA 6 is most closely corresponds with the criteria for shoreline residential designation. This could be an error in the SED report because they redesignated it in that report as rural conservancy, and it should remain as shoreline residential. I haven't received anything back from Andrew since the 2nd October to confirm whether they've identified that as an error or they intend to leave it as rural conservancy. I've got about 40 property owners right now that I've asked to hold fire on sending anything to the county on this. Since last Saturday, the 7th of December, we had a meeting until I get resolution from Andrew on this particular issue on that particular reach, LLA 5 to LLA 6 on pages 56 to 57 of Appendix A to the Environmental Designations Report. There's a lot of people upset down here because of that redesignation, which we obviously looks like it's an error, and also the one for LLA 6 to LLA 1, which is currently designated as rural, which is shoreline residential, and is supposed to be redesignated as rural conservancy. You're going to get a whole lot of folks after the first of the year coming at you about these environmental designations if this doesn't get resolved. So I would like to know tonight, when you get ready to present your information, if Appendix A is going to be discussed and reviewed by the commission before it goes final draft to the public hearing. And I'd also like to hear from Andrew about whether he has determined that that was an error in the SED report, or if they're going to stick with rural conservancy, which would be a real shame. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, let's move on to our work session, Shoreline Master Plan.
Okay, good evening, commissioners. Andrew DeFobis, Associate Planner with Community Planning. So tonight, the Planning Commission will continue its review of the draft Shoreline Master Program document dated October 21st, 2020. Staff are looking for specific feedback from you, any text changes or options that you would like to see in that document ahead of ultimately creating that public hearing draft. At the December 2nd meeting, we started or continued working through Chapter 19-400, and we'll continue doing that tonight. And just briefly to touch on the last comment, I do still have the Lake Lawrence question sitting in front of me and a couple others that I've received for Offit Lake as well. And the plan is ultimately to bring those back to the Planning Commission for review. Not necessarily, well, all of the Appendix A can be reviewed by the Planning Commission. That's the SED report. It's all part of the package, so the Planning Commission can look at that. So that will come back to them. But specifically, those questions about Lake Lawrence and Offit Lake are coming back to the Planning Commission for those designations. I do want to leave a little bit of time tonight at the end of the meeting to ask if there are any other topics from the Planning Commission that you'd like to receive sort of mini briefings on as we continue to move through the document. We kind of work on things and have discussions, and some things seem like they might be ripe for mini briefs or other presentations. So we'll have a little bit of time at the end to discuss that. And I do want to follow up on a couple items from previous meetings that the Planning Commission asked staff to look at. So there was a question about how far out into a water body does Thurston County's jurisdiction extend? And I was able to find some information in the WAC, essentially in RCW, that our jurisdiction as a county goes out to the midpoint of the body of water. So Puget Sound, you know, from shore to shore, whatever shore is across from where you're looking at, the midpoint would be the county's jurisdiction. And the same goes for streams and for lakes. So that's what's in law, and how that is implemented on the ground in the permit center. That's the other piece that I will get some information for you on, because that's all well and good, but what does that actually mean when someone comes in and applies for something? I think more often than not, it's probably pretty obvious, you know, especially if a proposed use is very close to shore, if it's a dock or a buoy, you know, a float, or even like a floating aquaculture system or something like that. You know, unless it's smack in the middle of the water body, it should be fairly obvious whose jurisdiction it's under, but there will be more to come on that piece. I went back and looked at a couple of the definitions. There were questions about the definition of predator exclusion, because I believe as written, it pertains, it's written for aquaculture. So the question was, should this definition be a little bit more general? Should it encompass other types of predator exclusion for other shoreline uses? The only place that that phrase is used in the entire document is in the aquaculture section. So my thought would be potentially that the Planning Commission could choose to put that word in the definition, like in the title of it, you know, predator exclusion, aquaculture or something like that. But anyway, I ran that to ground. That's the only place that that's used. For abandoned structures, so we have a threshold in the document that says after 2 years, if a use is abandoned for 2 years, it's considered abandoned essentially, and the full rules would apply versus being able to use the non-conforming or existing structure rules. I couldn't find anything in the WAC or the RCW that talks about that. And I asked Sarah Castle from Ecology, and she gave me some references for non-conforming language or existing structure and use language, but nothing that really touched on that topic. So the point there is to have a threshold. And so the Planning Commission can ultimately decide if there will be, if there's a need to change that language. There were questions about the cost of docks. So the Chapter 19 500, which we may get into tonight, it lists out all the exemptions from a substantial development permit that are permitted by the Shoreline Master Program and state law, including cost thresholds for docks. And there were questions about what all that entails. Does that include permit fees and things like that? Because that would add on or reduce the cost of a project before it would trigger the requirement for a substantial development permit. And so to quote from the WAC, which is incorporated into our document, when we're looking at whether a dock is going to trigger the need for a substantial development permit or not, it doesn't appear that the cost includes permits. The total cost or fair market value of the development shall include the fair market value of any donated, contributed, or found labor, equipment, or materials. So essentially, we're looking at the cost to do the work, not the cost that we put on the permit review of the work. The last piece that I was able to look at was the construction setback. And I know, and you can choose to continue that discussion tonight or hold it for later, but I didn't see anything in the handbook that explicitly requires us to add a setback to the buffer for construction purposes. I think the goal in doing so is to protect the buffer, ensure that the buffer is functioning in a fully vegetated state where that state exists. But the Planning Commission can potentially explore some options there to not have that language in there. In the handbook, it looks like there were examples that had a construction setback in addition to the buffer. There were jurisdictions that don't do it. So I think that's an area where the Planning Commission has some latitude to work on that. You might consider, if you do that, consider having a distance into the buffer, a maximum distance that, could be encroached upon during construction or requiring revegetation so that that buffer is actually going to function the way it does. So I think there's some things the Planning Commission can work with there. Some things I'm still looking into for you are whether, if you were to have a shoreline residence and start using it as a rental, does that change the use and trigger any permit requirements? Can we allow existing structures to move, if you wanted to move it back, but you couldn't move it or didn't want to move it all the way back out of the buffer, would we allow that? Can we allow that? What are the options for allowing existing structures to be expanded, the length of the structure? So not limiting it to 500 square feet, but saying if you wanted to bump out the entire back wall of your structure, what does that look like? And also what options may exist for addressing critical area protections based on the conversations we had at the last meeting to make it more clear and understandable as to what's going on there. So that's something that Jennifer and I are going to be working on. So that's just a brief update for you based on those items. So I can go ahead and share my screen and we can keep working through the document if that works for you guys.
Andy, can I just take care of some low-hanging fruit real quick?
Sure.
On Barry Halverson's issue with LL5 to LL6, the SED there, I think that one is really cut and dry for anybody that's looked at it very carefully. So if we could just I don't know how anybody else on the Planning Commission feels, but if we could just fast track that to the correction that needs to be shoreline residential, I think that's going to make everybody's life a whole lot easier.
So are you asking that in an upcoming meeting, whenever Appendix A comes back to the Planning Commission, that staff essentially have whatever change needs to be made, or whatever change staff would propose, or essentially the recommendation from staff, have that in that document when it comes back to Planning Commission.
Yeah, have the default being shoreline residential, and if somebody wants to make it argument to make it rural conservancy, they can make the argument then, but the default should be that that's shoreline residential.
Okay. And I know the Planning Commission as a whole hasn't really dove into that specific issue on that specific water body, but I am interested in if other folks do have any thoughts on that at this time.
If it's straightforward, it ought to be that way.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, so staff is planning to bring back any of the shoreline environment designations that we've heard about that people are interested in having us take another look at. Right now, it's only 3 of them. We're planning to bring those back. I think that if that's something the Planning Commission wants to see the Lake Lawrence one sooner, I could probably do that. I think that one is a little bit more straightforward than some of the other stuff we're working on. So I'll look for the nodding heads if you want me to bring that back sooner.
Yeah, I'd like to get that one done as quick as we can. I haven't looked at the one at Affett Lake or even Long Lake or Lake Lawrence 6 to Lake Lawrence 1. I haven't looked at that one very closely, but from 5 to 6 is really cut and dry. So if we can make that the default and then work from there, I think that will save everybody a bunch of headaches.
Okay. I think I can take a look at that. So, okay.
And then on all these other things that you talked about, you're going to bring them back again?
Yeah.
We were talking with Jennifer about them, so we don't need to
Yes.
talk about them tonight. It's just you're going to bring them back.
Right. So yeah. So there are some things that we're able to resolve as we move through the document. You see me making comments or making changes to the text that are pretty straightforward. Some things require a little bit more digging to ultimately come back to Planning Commission. So what I envision when you see this document again, and it's got the changes that we've been making together in it, any remaining items that still require Planning Commission decision will be in like a punch list format. So rather than going through, let's talk about chapter 100 tonight and 200 the next night, it'll be, there is an outlying or outstanding issue in this section based on this meeting. What say you, Planning Commission? That's my plan. So I was just kind of giving you an overview, very caffeinated update of the things that I've been able to look into, but I'm not expecting you to commit that to memory. That's just for your information. And yes, you will see those things again and have a plan to, or have an option to work on them or to address them how you see fit. That's the most efficient way I can think to do it, is we're whittling down to just these last sticking points. And then that will ultimately create your public hearing draft. Okay. Let me share my screen and we'll be off. Okay, are you all seeing the Microsoft Word document? Great. So as I had it, we had left off in chapter 19,400, 120B, finished that with B5 here being the last piece we talked about. So we can move forward starting with 120C. And I think for the ease of everyone watching, I think I will start calling them out by section rather than just saying who's got the next comment. I can say who's got comments in letter C, constrained lot and infill provisions. Does anyone have anything there? And if not, I'll just scroll and we'll get down to D, which is other uses and modifications in shoreline buffers. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this section?
Andrew, is on the, oops, lost it. The 4-foot wide trails, is that an ADA? I mean, it doesn't seem very wide to me, 4 foot. So is that?
So this is specifically for like personal properties. So if you own a home and you want to have a trail that goes down to the water, this is saying what you'd be allowed to do. There are other requirements for public access. So there's requirements for public access for certain types of development, and then there are standards in the document for recreational development in general. And some of those do definitely speak to ADA and allowing for that where necessary and where appropriate. Okay. Does anyone else have anything for letter D? I think, Doug, you might have had some questions about.
Under, I get pages mixed up. The D1B, you added in there adjacent to residential structures. What changes that? I mean, what does that mean?
So I remember that that was during a meeting we had. Open my notes here and see if I have anything super specific to tell you, but so that was added to clarify when what we're talking about here are the decks that you step out onto with your cup of coffee in the morning. It's right outside of your home. This section is intended to cover those types of structures. So that's why that was added.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else in letter D?
We did talk about those being pervious surfaces, those decks.
Right. And yes. And so let's see here. Yeah. So in the appendix B, which is the mitigation options, there are parameters there, and we'll get there again, looking down the road here. There is language in there that essentially allows that as an option. And I can't remember if that was something that we have actually changed at this point, or if it's at this point just a, hey, public, when you review this document, we want to hear your thoughts on this, but it is captured, yes. All right. Anything else in letter D? Otherwise.
4E.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't line up with
The water-oriented storage.
Yeah, what I wrote doesn't line up with what D4.
Oh, uh-oh. What is the comment?
Oh, here it is. It's B, not D.
Okay.
As the critical area or shoreline buffer shall be replanted. So in other words, if you have a tree that dies, you're going to have to replant with 3 trees. And most properties have, the waterfront is 50 to maybe 100 feet at the maximum. Very few are 100 feet or more.
Yeah.
100 to 70, 75 feet. You try to plant 3 trees in there, and it's a forest.
Can you tell me which section you're on? Sorry,
I have, it's on page 59.
Okay.
It's 1/400, 120, D.
Oh.
4B.
Okay, great. I see. I got it now. And just FYI, this shows as new language. It shows because it's pink that it was added since you last saw it. But this was moved from the residential standards in Chapter 600. So it's not new language. It's in a new space.
Right.
Yes, and so. Yeah, and I know that, the 3-to-1 ratio, the goal there is that, you plant some trees and you don't necessarily expect that they'll all make it. And this is intended to actually, at the end of the day, you have a replacement of what you're taking. And so here we're saying that is a standard requirement unless there's another determination to be made. So are you thinking along the lines of potentially adding some guiding language for staff that would enable them to make that call based on that case you're making?
Well, I think it should be 1 for 1. And you have a dead tree, plant one in its place. You're not going to plant 3 trees in the same place. You're going to plant them spread out as far as you can. And if one dies, they just.
And the other thought there is that, you're taking down potentially a larger tree and you're losing biomass, right? You're taking down something big, and to try to make that up and to try to, hasten that restoration, that's another reason why we see the 3-to-1. So I don't know. I don't know how much or like what I can really say about that, other than it's typical, it's standard. We see it in a lot of places, but it's up, the Planning Commission has the ability to direct us to modify language if you wish.
Andrew, since this section's about standards for hazard tree removal, can you just tell me how that would actually happen? Does a homeowner call you guys and say, hey, I got a bad tree, I want to take it out, and then have to set up a site visit? Or, I mean, if it's a hazard tree, a lot of times things have to happen pretty quick. And, if you call on a Friday afternoon and can't have somebody out there till Tuesday the next week, that might be problematic.
And we could look at that. I mean, we could look at potentially making some allowances if that were the case. Obviously, health and human safety is the number 1 priority. And so if that's something that needs looked at, we could do so. But yes, I mean, people do call and say, hey, I know that this is a buffer, or it's a tree on the shoreline. I know, before I cut that down, I'm just calling to see what I need to do. And typically it's, we ask for photographs or something like that, or staff can visit the site and make that determination. The goal is not to hold it up too long, but to make sure that, it's appropriate to be doing.
I can tell you how it actually works, because my neighbor had to do this. I mean, the tree removal company wouldn't cut the tree down until they got approval from the county. So they went to the county, certified the health of the tree, because they're also an arborist, and received approval immediately to cut it down. But most, I would bet that people who have view properties are not going to plant a dinky 3-foot tree because they don't want the tree growing up into their view. So they're going to plant a bigger tree. So unless the WAC requires a 3-to-1, I would propose that we only require 1-to-1. Because there's not room for 3.
There's a question. Between my fence and the back of my neighbor's garage is a dead tree. If they take it out, do they have to plant 3 by this rule?
If it's in the buffer, potentially. Yeah. So how does the planning committee? I'm going to change my view so I can see all your faces. What do you folks think? I mean, I don't know that is a requirement in the WAC. I'm not aware that it is. So Doug has said if it is not, he wishes to see that changed. What say the Planning Commission?
I agree with Doug. This is a hazard tree thing. This isn't somebody re-landscaping their yard. So this is kind of an immediate and emergent situation. So just replacing like with like seems appropriate in this situation.
And I agree.
Okay. All right. And I see Jim nodding. Okay. Okay. So let me make a note here. Moving faces again.
Well, Andrew, I was just curious, and you had mentioned that this is a kind of a standard thing out throughout other regulations, and if it's not included in the WAC, then maybe we need that verification. But the intent is to replace one tree with one tree. But I understand the need because the mortality rate oftentimes is, less than what you would. There's more than what you would potentially hope. So, but
Right.
I think the intent is to replace one tree with one tree, but I'm curious about your reference to other.
Yeah, I just know that in shoreline restoration guides and other restoration work and in other, mitigation required by the county, it's something you see it all the time. And I think it's more of a practical thing versus a hard and fast scientific consideration from what I know about it. but yeah, okay, so I will look at that, save the document, and okay. And then
The last thing was E. So someone's going to have to come out from the county to make sure you planted your tree and charge you a fee to do that, right?
not, it doesn't look like it's the mitigation side of it. It's more we may come out and look at the actual tree that's there, the hazard tree. And that's the same that we potentially do or make site visits for any manner of permits people make at the county, or permit applications people make, or we go out after they've had a professional go out to, document some sort of resource. We can potentially go and verify that work. So it's not a requirement. We're not saying it's going to happen every time, but we are reserving the right to do so by this language.
Can you combine D and E so it's even though I know they're both mays, it would suck for somebody to get hit with the may and D and then again get hit with the may and E and have to do both of those before he can take his tree down.
I agree. If you have a certified arborist, why do you need somebody else to take a look at it?
Right. I think it's reserving the option, Don, is my take on that, because we do that in other codes and other sections of code. But so Eric, how would that?
I think that if somebody had an arborist certify it using section D, then the county's option to look at it using section E should be gone. I think the certified arborist is enough, and any more than that is just more arduous than needs to be.
So potentially one means of accomplishing that could be to amend this and say, the department may require the applicant to consult with a professional forester prior to tree removal, or the department may require a site visit.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, if you don't do an arborist, we may still come out and look at it. If you do an arborist, we would. So I could make that change. I might want to run that to ground with Jennifer and with our permit folks, because I wouldn't want it to be misleading that we're never, ever, ever going to come out if you had an arborist, if there were a reason to doubt the work that was submitted. But that is more of just like a general.
Yeah, and I would like to still keep both of those as a may and not as a required, but not require both mays. Especially if there are options that somebody could take a picture and send it in and then get approval that way, and then nobody has to come out and nobody has to pay a fee.
And I think that is how it has worked currently. I think that is, like with critical areas, I believe that is an option. And this doesn't really say that. So perhaps it should say that as well. I mean, that would be, as we're interested in trying to make this easy to implement, and in this case, specifically life and safety issues, make that easier and quicker. Perhaps a photograph, that whole piece should be included here to give that option.
And something, if this is a hazard situation, you don't want to make it longer and more expensive.
Right. So do I have broad support from the Planning Commission to make that change to or? Do that?
Yes,
Okay.
I agree.
All right, well, let me go ahead and I'll just make that note.
So yeah, I'd agree with Eric. I don't think Thurston County has an arborist. So
right.
If I hire an arborist to come out and look, I don't think there's anybody at the county that needs to go see. I mean, and if you get the same arborist coming in with a lot of stuff and you're questioning it, then maybe the county does something, but I think that's more on the arborist than the homeowner.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're covered elsewhere, honestly, under just any professional submitting work. If it doesn't meet the standards that we put out for that work, we potentially have the ability to do a third-party review or go out and look at it. And I don't think we like to do those things if we don't have to, but it's a safety mechanism. Okay, so I've got that captured. I will also.
Andrew, this is Jennifer. We recently hired a current planner who is a certified arborist, and actually she's going to be working with long-range planning on some of our other danger tree and tree preservation ordinances. This is something that the board put on the docket last year. So You can check in with her on this section as well for sort of standardization across the codes. I know she's looking into that right now for another docketed project.
Okay, great, Jennifer. That's great news. Good to know. Okay, I just wanted to capture that other thought before I forgot it, because I think that's a good one. Okay, great. So let's keep moving. Anything else in 120 before we move to 125? Otherwise, I will ask if anyone has any questions or thoughts or anything to say about section 19,400, 125.
The first paragraph says new development. As you have defined new development in this document, it's everything. I mean, it's replacing a dock, replacing a bulkhead, replacing all, just everything. And so is this saying that if you replace your dock, you have to provide a stormwater management facility designed, constructed, and maintained in accordance with current
I wouldn't think so.
I wouldn't either.
I think this is intended to say if you're building something or developing where there is no development, then this would potentially apply. I think that would be a good clarification to make make it easy to understand, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let me write that down. And I think you're right. I think it is only new development, but just that's why I'm writing it this way. I will clarify that whether it does only indeed apply to new development, but I think it does. Okay. Anything else in 125?
The other thing under stormwater, I've said this before when we were back in the policies section, but the stream team estimates that 75% of the pollution in the waters of our county and the state is from stormwater. That being the case, I think we need to incorporate stronger language in this document for the treatment of stormwater, especially as populations increase and we create more hard surfaces and more runoff and more pollution. So I don't know whether it belongs in this section or going back to the policies and procedure or policy section, but.
And I read that comment and I was kind of curious what you thought or what your scale of that thinking is, because we know that there are problems related to stormwater today that cause water quality impacts today. And then we know that there is going to be new development along our shorelines and elsewhere within the county that will also contribute to stormwater problems. And so some of those things are going to be within the scale of what we can do in a master program, and other things may not be. So I think that's the question to keep in mind, or the thought to keep in mind is, what can we do? What can we county, or you planning commission, what can you recommend right now for this document, that will go forward, and what may be more overarching policy, regional type stuff that this program can't necessarily touch. So I think potentially, you could consider some other language here that sort of addresses those things you're talking about. And then that is definitely something I think as we move through chapter 600 to keep in mind as we look through the individual requirements for individual shoreline uses and modifications. There should be additional language there that talks about how you deal with stormwater in designing your projects so that you're, not creating loss of ecological function. So I think there's a variety of places to address that as we go through 600, but also potentially here. So if you have a language to propose, I'd be happy to hear it.
The ecology allows us to go outside the 200 feet for things such as this. And in the notes or the comments that I made on this chapter, I'll just read what I said. A paragraph should be added to prohibit the direct discharge of stormwater into wetlands or water bodies of the county. And that all stormwater utilities provide filtration ponds for the stormwater to enter the aquifer versus either directly into the water body or through settlement catch basins and then into the water body. Ecology guidelines give us the flexibility to do this. There are many places where roads and collect water and dump it directly into creeks that go right into our lakes. And that should not be allowed. That water, that storm water should go into catch basins and go into settling ponds. We require that of all of the subdevelopments that go in. It should also be a requirement of the county and the state in our, wherever it comes through our county.
Yeah. So your comments essentially are reflecting what would happen for new development, right? Not trying to mitigate further what's currently happening. That's what I'm
Well, I can't see where we can affect what's already happening.
Okay.
But anytime the county updates an area, redoes a road or whatever, then it would come under this and it would require them to put it into a catch basin, or not just a catch basin, because the current stormwater requirements say you put it into a catch basin, but then all that's for is to settle the solids out. That does absolutely nothing for the chemicals or the organic material that's in there that causes algae growth in all of our rivers and lakes.
Doug, are you suggesting that even if the county does something like repave a road, that they redo their whole stormwater system on that road?
I would. I have to do it if I was to redo my house. I mean, if individual property owners have to do it, why wouldn't the county? I mean, yes, it's expensive.
Probably because it would be $100 million project to.
Yeah, and I don't see where.
I'm not saying you're wrong, Doug. I'm just saying that that's an expensive ask.
It is. But I mean, all you got to do is put it into, just run the water into a catch basin. I'm not a catch basin, into a settling pond.
Yeah, but you have to buy the land for a settling pond, and then it's quite a project. Which section are we talking about putting this in here? Is this in
under stormwater in 125?
Yeah, so 19400s. These are the general regulations that apply to all shoreline development. And then there will be additional language regarding water quality and quantity that's going to live in each individual use in 600 where appropriate. So this is essentially saying that if you're new development, you have to provide new stormwater management facilities, and they have to be designed in a certain way. And then it's referencing the drainage design and erosion control manual and best management practices that the county already requires for all development, even if you're outside of shoreline jurisdiction. So some of those triggers that you're talking about, if you are not just new development, but potentially, you got a road or you have a project and you're upgrading it, and does that trigger any requirements? I think a lot of that stuff may already live in these drainage standards, the drainage design and erosion control manual. I'm wondering if it would be beneficial, if we're talking about kind of mini topics to dive into in another meeting, maybe it would be useful to do a deeper dive on what the county's requirements are. Because essentially what this document is doing, or what this section is doing, is saying you got to do stormwater management, and it points to existing documents to do that. So maybe it would be useful to have a broader conversation about exactly what do we require.
I like that.
Go ahead, Kerry.
I was just a little confused. I mean, this section, this is talking about new developments, and I don't know where that came in, but talking about like the county resurfacing a road or something. I don't think this section would apply. That's not a new development.
By definition of the SMP, it is.
Well, and whether or not it was a new development, the county may just be required to do it because of the drainage design and erosion control manual. I don't know that for sure, but there are standards that Public Works must apply to all their projects in shoreline jurisdiction or not.
Right.
So I mean, after all, why are we doing the SMP? In reality, the overall thing is what is the impact on water quality? we talk about shoreline ecological function, but that's just part of water quality. The overall issue is water quality. And if we're just, and they've said that homeowners need to be concerned about the water runoff from their front yard. And then we as county residents allow roads to just dump chemicals and organic material into the stream that goes into the lake. I mean, why should I spend dollar after dollar to fix some minute little thing like build a new dock, replacement dock, when it's a minutia compared to what we're doing as county residents.
Mhm.
So yeah, Andrew, I'd agree with, pull together some stuff and come back to us.
Yeah, and I want to pull in someone who knows a lot more about stormwater requirements of the county than I. And
Yeah, let's connect with Tim Wilson, the water resources manager, to see if he or one of his staff can come in and do a little mini briefing on stormwater management
I
today.
just have to say, I don't entirely agree with Doug with regards to, it's not only about water quality, but the ecological function and the biodiversity. And I think that is equally as important. And so I just wanted to make sure that was noted. But yes, definitely water quality is a big concern. We're a lot in understanding the hurdles that are in front of this community on Puget Sound and the degraded water quality that we do have. And yeah, a lot of it does come from stormwater. And I think oftentimes there are different jurisdictions that have, have the responsibility for managing this. And, the county has a portion of that, but the cities as well. So, but I just wanted to note that I think that there is a real need to protect the biodiversity as well. So,
And I think it's important to note too that while I don't think that Doug is wrong to be concerned about these things, I'm not sure that the SMP is really going to be the way to influence the drainage manual. That's a big ask, having the SMP telling Public Works that they gotta redo every road project in the county because that sooner or later that water might run off into the lake. And while I'd like to see that happen, that's going to be a really, really big ask.
that's why I think it would be useful to get someone in here who implements this thing and can answer that question if the county were to, so, today, before the new SMP even comes out, if there were a county road project and they were upgrading the road or repaving it, or those are two different things, what sort of stormwater work would they need to do? I think that's the first thing to try to understand is what happens now.
I'm kind of a little questioning, is this, we want good water. I'm totally on board with that. But this seems more like a permit kind of a thing with Public Works or whoever's doing the new project. I mean, it's in here that we want to keep them to this current stormwater management standards. So are we saying that we want to improve those standards through our document, or does that come somewhere else with the permits or the stormwater management folks?
I think that's the issue we're trying to get to the bottom of, and kind of what I led off with of trying to figure out what's within the scope of the SMP and what should be addressed here versus what might happen elsewhere. So, okay. All right, anything else in 125 except, more to come on that? Okay, if not, I'm gonna move on. Section 130, are there any questions, comments in section 130? Not. I'm gonna move on to 135, view blockage. I expect there are some questions and comments in this section.
A general one to start off, shouldn't there be some allowance here for elevation?
And there is, I believe, I think it's further down in this section. And if it's something that folks are looking for, whether it applies to them or not, then maybe we consider moving it. But scrolling down, I think it's number 5. Here we go. So consideration of existing mitigating circumstances. So whether you're going to have a setback line determined based on, you know, how that impacts the view of surrounding properties, that requirement can change based on an elevation survey, based on the presence of significant view blocking vegetation. And I think also something the Planning Commission may want to consider here would be whether there should be a distance in between. So yes, like you see this photograph, or sorry, excuse me, this figure here that shows 3 lots with 2 structures on either side and one that's going to be proposed. Is there a certain distance that those structures, beyond which this shouldn't apply? So if you know, those existing primary structures are 100 feet apart versus they're 500 feet apart, is there a difference? So Doug, yes, that it's in there. It is just further down in that section.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, but no worries. But anyway, yeah, just I have that in there because that's an unresolved thing. Is that might be the other consideration that ecology brought up, is maybe there's a distance beyond which this shouldn't apply. So food for thought. Okay.
An example in 135A3.
Yep.
In this case, maybe the distance is, as you just referred to, the width of the lots might have an impact there, but I don't understand why the new primary structure that's in the middle has to be that far back. Why can't it go up to the?
So so the goal is the goal is view preservation for the existing homes that are there. So think about the home that's on the left. If you're that homeowner, and you know, think of your view out across this water body before and after, you know, a new primary structure were to be built closer to the water. So the intent here this structure here, this new primary structure, all other things being equal, could be all the way up to, you know, the buffer and setback, wherever we land on that issue. This is saying because there is another structure on the neighboring parcel that is much further back, that this new structure, you know, would come back a bit to accommodate that view.
I don't like that. I don't like how a neighbor can restrict a new buyer's building opportunities because he decided that he wanted to build his house further back first.
Mm-hmm.
If existing primary structure wanted to be 200 feet away from the water, and that limits, so the next structure can only be, you know, 175 feet when the buffer would have only kept him back 50 feet. I don't think that, I don't want my neighbors having that much control over me and my land.
And I agree with that.
Okay, and I think, oh, go ahead, Ed.
Is there anything similar on blocking of views in non-shoreline areas? Because, I mean, there are folks with hillside homes that are probably more concerned about getting their views blocked than looking to the right or left on a waterfront lot.
I'm not sure about. I'm not sure about other county code. I think the critical areas ordinance does touch on this a little bit in terms of buffers, but I from the top of my head, it does not come. I think this is an area where the Planning Commission may have some more discretion, because I went through at least a couple of the WACs today. I had a few minutes to look at this and didn't really see a whole lot of definitive information about view protection. Views are, it's kind of a policy thing, right? And it's an overarching goal that people have the ability to touch and view the water. But I don't think there's a whole lot of instructive guidance on this issue, and that's why you'll see jurisdictions do different things when it comes to view. So
I don't think that existing view or that existing structure bought the view in front of my house. He can look directly in front of his house. He doesn't need to look directly in front of my house if I'm building. And I don't think that it's fair or right at all for a neighbor to be able to dictate what happens on somebody else's property, especially when it goes uncompensated.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree.
Yeah. So okay, so yeah, I think I would absolutely be curious in how everyone feels so that we can figure out what to do with this. And then also it might be useful to look through each section of view protection here and see kind of what's the will on each one, because I don't know whether you want to scrap it outright or whether there are some instances where potentially some of this you would want to keep.
Maybe we need to get a legal opinion on it, because as far as I'm concerned, they should be able to move it right up to the buffer.
Mhm. Okay. So I think I've seen, yeah, Don and Jim and Eric and Doug. Okay.
Yeah, and marine environment,
Agree on
you have,
this too.
live on the side of a hill and people plant trees in front of you, and 10 years from now, you don't have a view anymore, and they can't do anything about it.
Yeah, no, you can go buy the rights to the view, but you're compensating then, so.
Right.
I'm
I had a
looking.
view of the Olympics from my city house, and then Department of Environment or Enterprise Services built their building in front of it. So I'm a victim.
And they didn't get any money for that either.
No.
Okay. So I'm just kind of looking through here at the pictures to see if there are if there's anything else that you'd want to think about. So 1 and 2 are not even really triggering this. This figure 3 is where you're further back from the buffer and setback than you would be allowed otherwise. The same goes. So, okay. So
4 is another one.
4 is another one. Okay. That's kind of what I wanted to do, was move through these and make sure there wasn't a reason. And then otherwise, potentially we can greatly reduce this section pending, anything I find out from legal or ecology. But yeah, I think you have I think this is an area where you've got flexibility.
Who's in there too, Andrew?
Sorry?
No, figure 2, A2B, yeah. Where you have to set back you have this little one.
Oh, so that's just saying, so actually this line right here, this dashed line is the buffer actually for the shoreline. And then this is saying buffer plus setback. So in this example, the home that's already there is in the buffer. It's a legally existing conforming structure, call that. But figure 3 is saying you're further back than the buffer would require because of view. And then figure 4 is that same scenario. And what I'm hearing from the Planning Commission is to take this out unless there is some requirement to keep it in.
Yes.
The whole section, yeah.
Which would render letter or number 5 moot point. Okay. Let me just make a broad note on that. On the section.
Andrew, when it says that the administrative variance in D1 can be obtained from the director, is that the director of CPED, Josh?
Yeah, or his designee. It essentially means staff.
Okay.
That's usually what that means. Anytime you see the word director, construe it to mean typically director or designee.
Of CPED.
Yeah. Yes. It would be CPED. And hopefully, I don't want to scroll up now and make us all dizzy, but hopefully director is defined. If it is not, it certainly should be.
Ask you a question, Andrew. If somebody can demonstrate that they can totally repair, replace, do whatever's necessary to reinstate the buffer, why do they have to have a 15-foot construction setback?
So I think that's the issue the Planning Commission can choose to change. So, and I think the plan there is the goal is to protect the buffer. If we're going to require, let's say, 150-foot buffer on something, the goal in having that setback is to ensure that there is that 150 feet. So kind of what I led off with at the start of this is that I'm not so sure that 15-foot setback is the only means of making sure that your buffer stays intact. There could be other things the Planning Commission can explore. And that's one of those punch list items that that, y'all need to advise me on before we get to public hearing draft. But, I looked at it based on that last meeting, and that thus far is what I have found.
I would think if they could demonstrate that they could replace and repair the buffer, that ought to be adequate.
And that could be an option. That was kind of my thought, was presuming there's nothing I'm missing here. If that buffer is repaired, perhaps that temporary impact is something that could be allowed. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we'll have some more information on the view blockage the next time you see it then. I think there might have been some comments in section 140, the bulk and dimensional standards.
Yeah, under the table there, I assume that is for new development or new plot plans.
Correct.
Because everything else, so shouldn't we say that?
Well, so lot width, I would say, would apply to new lots. I mean, if you have it already platted out, it's already platted, it's already subdivided. It doesn't matter what we require because it's already there. Unless you were going to further subdivide, yeah, but a lot of those other things are talking about new development on existing lots. So the buffer would apply to new development no matter how your lot was configured, and so would setbacks for anything you're building. Same for the impervious surface or the building height. All that would apply to new development on an existing lot. So potentially, and I cannot read all the words at once, but so right here where my cursor is in lot width, that could be an easy fix, just to say lot width for new lots. And then, because I think the rest of these things, yeah, I'm totally comfortable with that. And planning commission, if you want me to make that change, I'll do that. I can do that right now.
You could do it up above, or just say that it should apply to all new shoreline use and new development activities. Would that suffice?
It could. Yeah, that's another option. I might want to. Okay, hold on a sec. Let me mark it then, and noodle on that before I make that change. But okay, all right. I made a note. I'll look at that, and either doing it there or doing it down below in the lot width, or wherever is the most clever. Yep, I will take a look at that. Okay. Anything else in 140? Otherwise, move on. 145, public access. If not, and this is another language was just moved, not amended. Okay. Down.
One quick question, Andy. It says if they're developed 4 or fewer lots, they don't have to have public access. If they put in 5, what happens?
Then public access is required as a component of the development, but it's only required for the people, for the lots that are there. So it's not just
here.
Sorry?
Does it say that in here?
That's a good question.
It says public access, and that's a problem I had when we went through it the first time.
I think it says it somewhere. That is my understanding, is if you're subdividing and you're creating 5 new lots on the shoreline, you're required to have some sort of public access element as part of that development, but it does not mean that is then a public access point that I can bring an inner tube to on a Saturday afternoon. It's for the people that are in that development.
It's more for.
But does it say that here?
Yeah, that's what I want to look up.
Sounds like it's more for, I call it community access rather than public access. It's just for the people in that little development is what you're saying, right?
Right. Okay, let's see. I will make a note to verify that, because that's the understanding. But we want to make it crystal clear to anyone reading this and has that question, what do you mean I have to let everyone come and use my, launch? And that's not
public access to me would mean that it's open to the general public.
right, which is not what it means. It is not.
Change it to community access.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think the WAC refers to it. I think the state law and the phrasing is public access. I think that's the confusion. So effectively it would be community access, but legally in the WAC, it's called public access.
When I asked that question and Sarah was in our meeting,
Yeah.
and I said, you mean I would have, if I developed, more than 4 parcels on the lake, that I would have to allow the public to access that lakefront? And she said, yes. And she,
But I think,
and she meant the public. She didn't mean the community.
okay, that is not my understanding. And I thought that I can picture a number of meetings where we might have talked about that, but that's not my understanding. So let me run that to ground to make sure. And once we know for sure, let's make sure it's in the document somewhere so that in the future people are not confused.
Yeah. I hope it's your interpretation and not my understanding of what Sarah said.
Required access versus general public access. So here. Okay, there. So I'll run that to ground and then we will get it in here, either here or wherever else in the document it would best be included. So we'll see, we'll test some memories and see who prevails there. Okay. Anything else in public access? Otherwise we'll move on to whatever came next. The flood hazard reduction measures. And if not, okay, 155, restoration and enhancement. All right. Oops. All right, well, that's 400. So take a quick stretch and we can keep powering through 500. So does anyone have any questions, thoughts, anything for the first section there, 050 or 075?
I have a question. How do you determine the difference between limited discretion and substantial discretion in C?
Yeah. So
in B.
Right. So this framework of permit types is what underlies the overall county permitting system. And so that's why you see that here in SMP. The goal was to take all the different shoreline approvals that would be authorized under this program and align them with the current permitting scheme in the county. So this is language that came from the overall county codes. And the best I can say is that, if you look at the Title 20 and the other county titles that list out all the different permit reviews the county does, all those permits have been separated into buckets. And at some point that review was done, or, assessment was done by staff building county code saying, these types of projects are more limited discretion. These types of projects we want more discretion on, so we're going to call them type 3. So all I can say is it's a gradation. I don't know exactly if there's a pointing to a definition of what is limited discretion versus substantial discretion, other than to say that all the other county permits that we issue have been put through this filter. So that is something that I could look into a little bit more and talk to our current planning folks and see if they can give me some more guidance on that. But I just know that as you move up to, as the project moves up in complexity and, you know, the effects it may have on the public and how many members of the public, you know, you kind of move up this echelon, right? You know, smaller projects are lower type, big projects are, you know, type 5 or type 3. And then what we're doing right now is it's like a type 4 process, right? We're doing you know, essentially a development code update. So
I'm
I
just
can look
wondering,
into
because if this is used as the yardstick, I was just wondering what's the difference between limited and substantial? There must be some kind of a definition.
Right. And I don't know about the definition. I do know, so looking at the what we've got here in the parentheses, a type 3 process where the county's saying we want to exercise substantial discretion is requiring a hearing examiner decision, which is more discretion than, you know, doing an administrative review where the hearing examiner does not issue an opinion or a decision on that. So I think that is, yes, I can look into that a little bit more, but as we keep moving through the document and it talks about the different types of permits that a various activity would require, that might be instructive to kind of think of those as examples as we go through it. Because I don't know that there's a definition to point to. I can only say that if you look at the different shoreline approvals and how we type them out, you know, they should, the type should go up as the complexity of that goes up. That's a lot of words, but let me see if I can find some more background on that for you. So I will write that down.
Andrew, it's just the word that bugs me for some reason in 075B where it says subjective standards. I mean, who's making that determination what's subjective and what's not? And I don't know. I guess I have a problem with that. Just the wording of it. It seems like if I go to one person, they may think one thing, and another person may think something else. And who am I? You know, but anyway, that's just me. So.
Yeah, I think, and again, I mean, this is how all of our other permits that our current planners currently issue today. You know, all the things they're doing have been filtered through this permit type. So it might be useful for me to just talk with someone in current planning and just kind of ask them, how does this shake out? You know, what does it mean? What's a subjective? What's a good example of, you know, a project that would have subjective standards? Because obviously the bigger the project, I mean, you want it to be, and the more impactful potentially to a critical area or shoreline or something like that. I mean, you want it to be based in objectivity, and you want the appropriate level of review.
And I think that's one of what you just said there is one of the problems that I hear from people that go up to CPIT up there is somebody will go there with their plans on Monday, and one person will tell them one thing, and then they'll go there on Thursday and they'll be told something different. So I guess that's a subjective piece that I have a problem with. So
is there something specific, or does it depend on the mood of the person that's looking at it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it might be useful to look at those different shoreline permits and approvals we issue that are called out as a type 1, as a type 2, as a type 3, and kind of think of them through those as examples, right? I know that there's something in the document somewhere that's a type 2 approval, and so it might be useful to look at that. It's probably, I'm thinking like maybe one of the buffer reductions might be a type 2, right? And kind of try to think about how that would be applied, and what are the things that everyone would look at. Is there anything that is subjective, or is it more objective? I'm not sure. So I can try to bring back more information about that, about how it currently works. So,
Well, Andrew, as you noted in the highlighted area, just down below where it shows on the screen,
yeah,
we had a lengthy discussion about existing property and new development and the use of a substantial development permit versus an administrative substantial development permit and such and so forth. That's, I think, what this yellow is getting to, in that there isn't anything on my property that I would do that I should have to have a substantial development permit or go to a hearing examiner to get permission for, or to notify all kinds of people. I do have to notify my neighbors, but I don't have to. So I assume we're going to chat about this as we get further down, as we get into those.
yeah. And I think I have a hunch that this is also something we'll hear a good amount of testimony about during the public hearing as well. But yeah, essentially the county has the ability or the authority to determine how these permits are reviewed to some extent. So the conditional use permits and the variances ultimately must be approved by ecology. The substantial development permits, the county is the approval. Ecology could appeal it if they wanted to, but the county makes the decision on those. But how we do those, how we run those through our permit system, we have latitude on that. I don't think that so the substantial development permit, the conditional use permit, the variance on the county side of things, it is appropriate for the planning commission to look at those and decide which of those should be administrative and which of those should be not administrative. The difference being, are staff making these decisions, or is there a hearing examiner public hearing required, which is additional process, it's additional cost for the applicant, and it is yeah, it's just an additional decision point that must happen on a project before it leaves the county and goes to ecology. So, and that is the where we land on that is going to, or where you all land on that is going to influence how these different permits are characterized. Are they type 5s or type 3s or type 1s? What are they? If we're trying to ultimately fit these shoreline permits under the existing permit scheme so that it's consistent, you know, where they shake out in that type 1 to 5 system will depend on where the planning commission lands on requiring hearing examiner review or not. And as we know, on certain topics, we will certainly hear from the public about their preference for having hearing examiner review or not. And, you know, there may be concern from individual property owners saying, I don't want to have to do a public hearing from the hearing examiner for my project, and fair enough. And you may look at something like aquaculture, where the public's saying, we want to see more oversight or less oversight, depending on their view on that. So I think you're going to hear a lot about that, but it's certainly planning commission can propose what they want to see here.
So Andrew, if we do decide to go with some administrative substantial development permits and allow for an administrative permit, would that preclude the applicant, if they got news they didn't want, from going to a hearing examiner? So say administratively, you guys said no, would that then mean they couldn't go ask a hearing examiner?
The appeals process would still be in play. So whatever the permit is, whatever appeal remedies exist for the landowner would still exist. We're just saying that it wouldn't be a requirement for them before they get their county decision.
No, I get that. I'm just saying, if there might be multiple paths for somebody to get their permit, if they were denied one administratively, would the next step be to go through the regular appeal process, or could they just do the half step and do the hearing examiner process?
Kind of, do you mean do it, I hate to use the word proactively here, but is that what you're saying, or?
What, yeah, could the applicant choose one or the other, or both? If we allowed administrative, could they choose to do administrative or hearing examiner review?
Should they see, I guess the scenario you're thinking of is to provide flexibility in such instances where a landowner thinks it may behoove them to do the examiner review.
Yeah.
That's not something I've thought of, but that's certainly something I could look into. And there, on the fly, I'm not going to try to imagine scenarios where someone might wish to do that, but keeping that option open for them is certainly something we could explore.
I think the scenario that everybody's thinking of is if we let GUI duck operations go under with an administrative substantial development permit, and somebody at CPED says, no, you don't get it, can that GUI duck operator then go to a hearing examiner to get the permit?
I think that would happen under the appeal. But that's something for me to look into. But that's my understanding is, they can appeal any permit decision, and any permit decision or administrative decision made by the county can be appealed.
Okay, I just like to leave flexibility for applicants.
Sorry, Eric?
I just want applicants to have maximum flexibility.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't I just take that down as a little note to kind of look at the appeal pathway and whether that's affected by, I'm going to type it in here. So hold on a sec. Oops. Well, right. Just make it here. Okay. All right. We'll look at that. But yeah, I think this whole conversation, we'll be talking about this one for a little while, or we'll flavor a lot as we move through things. Because this is a big concept. Okay. Anything else in 075? Knowing that we'll be talking about it for a while, but for now, anything else? Otherwise, we'll move on to 19-500-100 permit application review and permits.
Five.
Okay.
Anytime you need written approval for an exemption, I don't get how you can get a written approval. If you're exempt, you're exempt. And then that goes into 7 as well. How can you have a condition on an exemption? Either you're exempt or you're not exempt. And if you're exempt, needing written approval, I don't understand that concept at all. If something like mowing my grass is considered development or use different than what I'm already at, I have to get written letter of approval of exemption. That makes no sense to me.
Right. And you wouldn't in that instance, just FYI, lawn is, these regulations are not retroactive. So if you have a existing lawn that's, in the buffer, you can maintain that without.
Well, I would need to get it for if I wanted to paint my house, wouldn't I? Or re-roof my house. Those are exempt activities. If I wanted to put in a new stove in my house, that's an exempt activity. I would need to get written approval to put a new stove in my house or a new toilet.
I want to say no. So let's work on how we say no to that. Yeah. Okay. And so I had a little bit of conversation today with one of our current planners on a different topic that bled into wanting to pick her brain about how this was envisioned when current planning sat with Brad before me and worked through this and talked about permitting. What did they envision? Because I think the goal is, to put projects through this lens of, do you need a permit or not? Do you need, if not, if you're exempt, what sort of documentation is provided? I think I need to learn a little bit more about what was envisioned there, because I don't think the goal was to require any sort of notification for anything you're doing inside your house or to the exterior and the footprint. I don't think so. So I think the wording could be,
seems pretty broad.
Right.
It is broad, and in that first line, what is a development? That's lowercase, so it's not a defined term. When it's,
It is defined though. Development is defined in the master program. I could flip to that now.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
But
Yeah, that
I
second
mean,
sentence is problematic.
yeah, but the point is well taken. I mean, I think this, yeah, it needs to make sense. So, okay, and there may be further language or language further on that is more instructive about what happens when someone applies or is doing a certain type of project. But I think at the bare minimum, this needs to be flagged for clarity.
Yeah, the WAC isn't super. I'm looking at 173, 27040. This is about substantial development permits, but it talks about the burden of proof that a development or use is exempt from the permit process is on the applicant. Local government may attach conditions to the approval of exempted developments and or uses as necessary to ensure consistency of the project with the act and the local master program. That's from the WACs.
I'm going to guess that's that way they can track programmatic net losses. Is that the idea?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's what we're trying to figure out here is the threshold of who needs a written approval so that we can do that. And not every project is going to need that. And, you know, that's a kind of a question that I had too, where we talk about things that are categorically exempt from a substantial development permit because of state law. And if you are, you get a letter to that effect, which makes sense to me because the state law calls out conditional use permit, variance, substantial development permit, and the exemptions. Those are 4 things. And so it makes sense that that's documented in one of 4 ways, right? Either a permit or a letter. But it's all these other things we talk about that potentially are exempt, that don't need a permit, but, you know, might have some development standards about how you do it. I'm thinking about, you know, if you wanted to do a trail in your buffer and we're saying it's allowed, do we need to put that in writing? You know, that's kind of, it makes sense to me that there should be in this document, it should be clear if you're looking at it and saying, I'm either doing something that requires a permit or I'm doing some sort of activity on my property that's mentioned in this document. Well, then what approval, if any, do I need from the county? And, you know, let's get that clear so that you all can, you know, weigh in on what makes sense for us to require.
Well, when you look at 19-150-280, the definition for development, it starts right out, any human-made change. So the ridiculous edge case really is mowing my lawn. Mowing my lawn is a human-made change. If I need, and I understand that's the ridiculous edge case, but that's what we need to worry about at times.
Yeah. Let's go back most times.
Yes.
But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and you know, especially if this letter of exemption requires, you know, long processes or fees paid or anything like that, it's going to be a huge problem.
Okay.
And this is a great example of what should be in that pamphlet we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
We could list those things like that, so the property owner knows what they can just go do without having to get permission.
Right.
If every exempt activity requires written approval, what would that do to staff time?
Right. And I think, yeah, I don't think that's the intent that everything everyone does everywhere, every time would require written approval. So I want to chase that back with current planning and figure out what they envisioned, because there is some tracking that needs to take place, but there is also certainly a line to be drawn in what makes sense. And, you know, we got other stuff to do too. So
It might make more sense. I mean, if there's some particular exempt activity that they think needs a written approval, but I would usually assume if something was exempt, I could just go ahead and do it.
right. Yeah. Understood. Yeah, it makes sense to clarify that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Andrew, I too.
Andrew, I think maybe it would be helpful to put what is exempt before that, because I mean, well, I guess that's and that's part of the problem. Normal maintenance or repair of existing structures or developments, including damage by accident, fire, or elements.
Mhm.
So
Where are you reading? Where is that coming from?
that's one of the exemptions.
For the substantial development permit?
Yes, it's on page 75. There's a list
Right.
from the WAC.
Right. So you're saying to potentially move that up? Or
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think we've got two problems here. One is you read this and you say, what's exempt? And two is, if you read that, normal maintenance or repair, Eric's right. If I want to paint my house, that's exempt. And according to what we're looking at now, I'd have to get permission from the county for that.
Yeah.
Well, I think those exemptions are only exemptions for SDPs, not for any development. There's lots of development that doesn't require an SDP that you would think would be considered exempt, but it's not outlined.
Mhm. I think the any and all is confusing because that opens it up, right? That opens it up to saying, yeah, you're exempt, but you still need written approval.
Yeah, but it wouldn't matter, but even just taking those words out wouldn't change it. It still would say you need written approval to do exempt activities. Need to look into this more.
Yeah, and maybe it's a case of written approval may be required for the following specific exempt activities, and then it's actually clear. I don't know.
Or maybe it needs to be exempt from an SDP.
Right.
Is the only thing that you need to track.
Okay.
I think Eric made a good point there. I mean, exempt from what? Is it the exemption for the SDP 2 pages down, or is it some other exemption?
Okay. Okay.
I mean, the way this reads now, it's all development, not just development that is SDP purview.
Right.
Well.
Yeah. And I think, it can be confusing when the word exempt from what? Because there are specific exemptions from an SDP, but there may be other things that the state doesn't require. An SDP doesn't call it out, but it's something people do on the shorelines, and we're not going to require a permit for it. So, yeah, I think that just needs.
I'm wondering if that number 5 even needs to be in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it does. It does not need to be in there as currently written. Let's put it that way. So let me look at that and see if there's any. Because I think we want to advise people of that, but we want the advisory to make sense, right? If there are certain things that are going to require, okay, I don't know. Let me look at that further and how we might reframe or rework that, because again, that's a pretty broad concept that we want to get right. So, okay, we're still in.
Back on item 2, I assume that's written just like it is in the WAC, but I need to understand what a substantial number of residents means and overriding consideration of public interest means.
Yeah, I believe that is how the WAC is written. I don't know that the WAC is going to be any further instructive than that, and that may be the call that the county has to make.
So I guess I'd just like to know how the county would interpret this. If I came in and wanted to go 40 feet, what?
Yeah, the WAC says no permit shall be issued for any new or expanded building or structure more than 35 feet above average grade level on shorelines of the state that will obstruct the view of, goes on beyond this, of a substantial number of residences on areas adjoining such shorelines, except where a master program does not prohibit the same. And then only when overriding considerations of the public interest will be served. So it's the same.
It's similar. We change it and say, except we're allowed through a variance. So
right.
we're making that allowance as allowed in state law. We have made it, and what we say is variance. Yeah, so I mean, at present, don't have any further information on that other than to say, you know, someone would have to make their case. They would apply for a variance. And that's one of the criteria that the county would look at is, are there any residences that are going to be impacted here? How much, how many? But, you know, I don't think there's a magic number out there anywhere that says, you know, if you got 5 homes around you that are impacted, that's okay, but 6 is not okay. I don't think that number exists. Yeah, and then let's see. Okay. Well, and also it's saying overriding considerations of public interest will be served, and I don't know if that would then apply to just a single family home. It would serve their interest, right? If they wanted to have something higher and we allowed it, but would that serve anyone else's interest? I don't know. So I'm not sure exactly where that applies, but that is state law. Can look into it.
Know how we apply it. That's all. It reads really screwy.
Okay. Yeah, and that might be an ecology question if they're familiar with any cases where this has been triggered, because clearly it's state law. We got to have it in here somewhere, but what does it mean?
Yeah, you know how do our people enforce it?
And, you know, I mean, this depending on how old this standard is, it might be in our current SMP, and so our folks in current planning might have some information on that too. So, yeah. Okay, I'll look at it. Okay, anything else in 100? Otherwise, so again, we're moving through kind of these, at some point, you know, be interested in the Planning Commission's thoughts on permit types. You know, probably not tonight, looking at the clock, but before we finish out 500. The exemptions section.
I mean, I got a question on 100B4. I'm trying to decipher my notes here.
Okay.
And basically it says, how will the footnote highlighted public hearing option under B2 be applied to this paragraph?
Okay. Well, so paragraph 4 is talking about the exemptions to the act, or sorry, exemptions to the substantial development permit, right? So if you're exempt from that requirement, then you would not need to go through the permit process. And so if the Planning Commission were to say substantial development permits need to have hearing examiner approval, well, if you're exempt from that permit requirement, you wouldn't need to have that approval. Yeah. Oh, and then it's saying, it's advising that, you know, just because you are exempt from a substantial development permit doesn't mean there aren't development standards that apply. And also, as we know, just because you're exempt from a substantial development permit does not mean you're not exempt from other types of permits, right? You can be exempt from an SDP because state law says so, but the county still has the ability to require a conditional use permit. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but, you know, I think where you all land on these other permit types and what they require will help to answer that question. But I see this as, this is related to the exemptions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I think I might have seen some questions in the actual list of exemptions. I don't know if anyone has any or
Yeah, I
otherwise.
do. Scott, I'm suggesting we stop here at C. Because Andrew said he had a bunch of stuff to bring us up to date on at the end.
Oh, not a bunch of stuff. I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to, if you had any other things that you wanted to discuss, having me go back and bring you mini briefings on. And Doug, specifically, I was thinking you might want to take that time to talk about the email you sent me about the different testimony we received on the plastics issue with aquaculture. So that, yeah, it's not a substantial amount of stuff to give you. It's just to give you some time to talk these things through. But I would not oppose, or I agree with you. This might be a good stopping point if the planning commission is interested in that.
I think it probably is.
Okay. 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 I'm actually going to type it in here so I remember where we stopped. All right, well, I will stop sharing the screen. That's great. So that was very good feedback. Thank you very much. So yeah, briefly, the last thing I have for you was just an opportunity. If there's anything else, we're going through this document A to Z, but if there are specific topics you want me to bring you a brief on, and there's broad interest in that, that's what we're interested in hearing. I think the stormwater is going to be one from tonight's meeting. And yeah, so the floor is open for you all. And I know Doug had potentially at least one to bring up, but let's hear what you have.
And what I had is I'd asked Andrew that we had gotten a letter from Taylor Shellfish quoting a whole bunch of regulations and different stuff about plastics. And we also got a letter from Patrick Townsend quoting all kinds of regulations also about plastics. And for us, me anyway, trying to decipher which one is right and which is, whatever, I look to the staff to look at those two documents and tell us what's up. What regulations about plastic are applicable and which aren't.
Right. And so that is, I am poised to do that if that is something that the planning commission wants to have staff look into. So would be happy to hear what the planning commission thinks about that topic. Is there any other consensus on that or thought on that? Is that something people would like more, like a mini brief on?
Yeah, sure. That would be very interesting. Yeah. For this, are you thinking of doing it this evening or our next meeting?
No.
Okay.
Just putting it on the list for a future meeting to
Okay.
come back and say, is this something you want more information on?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good for the next meeting.
I see Ed nodding. What do y'all?
My question is, we ask you to do all these things, and obviously you don't have infinite amount of time or resources to do this, and trying to prioritize all the efforts that you guys are trying to accomplish. I just would ask everybody to think about what is the priority. And we've been at this for quite some time, and me being a staffer too, I understand it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time and effort, and just wanted to throw that out there, is that when we ask staff to do things, it requires a lot of time and effort. So just throwing that out there.
I appreciate that, Tile, for sure. And I think that's sort of that was the strategy of, wanting to bring it up before the planning commission and figure out that as a body, what are the topics that you all really think you need a deeper dive on or want more information on. And then that's our job. I mean, that's what we do. And I think that, this could also be, it could be instructive and timely, because it's one of the hot button issues in this effort. And I think that the public would be interested in that, more of a discussion on it. And I don't know, I think it could be useful.
Yes, thanks.
And I think it's helping to document the process as well. You know, these are sticky issues, and you guys are doing your due diligence in running everything to ground, and it all becomes part of the record of all the things that you considered and all the work that you did in making your recommendation for a master program. So, okay. On the list. Are there any other topics? And this, you know, this can, if you think of things, you can bring them up in future meetings, but we just wanted to at least, you know, give an initial opportunity. So anything else?
Have you guys figured out a timeline yet on when you're gonna start sending out postcards and opening up more resources for the public?
We're still planning to do that as we get to the end of this round of review and have a public hearing draft ready to land. I mean, the draft is the focal piece. It's the crown jewel of our, you know, update effort and our public outreach phase, the next public outreach phase.
But these won't happen until we have a completed draft for public consumption. Okay.
Yeah, it just can't, because we have to tweak all our fact sheets to reflect the options that are in the public hearing draft, so they match up.
Yeah, the only one I was really concerned about is the tool for comparing SEDs over time. And I know there's a lot of interest in that tool, and the sooner that can get out, I think the happier.
Yeah, well, let's make whatever tweaks we need to make to those designations, which is what you've already called for, before we put that tool out too, so we don't have incorrect information out there.
Okay. All right. If nothing else, that is all I have. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Staff updates.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute for a second. That was really weird. Can you hear me now? Okay, so the board took action, the Board of County Commissioners took action yesterday, seems like a long time ago, to adopt two big things you worked on this year. So the 2020 comp plan amendments were adopted by the board. That includes update to the mineral lands designation, several other chapters, the recycled asphalt policy, and the Nisqually sub-area plan was changed to allow recycled asphalt processing subject to the additional BMPs. And the Rochester sub-area plan. So all of that was adopted yesterday. The board largely followed the Planning Commission's recommendations on the package of amendments. It ended up being a 2-to-1 vote. Commissioner Menzer had opposition to co-designation of mineral lands and ag lands of long-term commercial significance. So he couldn't vote in favor of the whole package because it all comes as one big amendment package under GMA. The board also adopted, and this was unanimous, the accessory dwelling unit regulations. You might have seen an article in the Olympian this morning. Basically follow the Planning Commission recommendations. There was one small tweak to conversions of accessory structures to convert those into ADUs. The board landed on those had to be legally permitted and in place for at least a year before you could go and convert to an ADU. The rest is pretty much the same. So 3 different types of ADUs are now allowed in rural Thurston County, subject to, you know, size and density requirements, attached, inside conversions of an existing primary residence, conversions of an accessory structure, and then new detached ADUs, subject to density requirements. So yeah, those were 2 big, huge things on Friday. The board will be adopting the capital improvement program, which you also worked on. And that's a lot for December. So thank you for all your work on all of that. And I know the board appreciated it and said so in their adoption action and deliberations. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Okay. Calendar. Is anybody not here on January 6th? And I am still a maybe. Okay. How about January 20th? Okay, does anybody else have anything for the good of the order?
Just like to say Merry Christmas to everybody. Hope you have a safe New Year.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you too to Andrew, because I know this is such a tough topic and I think you've done a great job of really presenting the information and working with the council here. And so I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
Okay, and what may be a first ever, I'm going to adjourn the meeting exactly when it was supposed to be adjourned at 8:30. See everybody next year.
Merry Christmas.
Bye, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.